The observation deck of Station Theta 9 had seen better centuries. Jackson pressed his weathered palm against the reinforced glass, watching the violet nebula swirl in lazy spirals outside. Dust motes caught the dying light of the distant sun, and for a moment he forgot why he was here. Salvage work paid poorly, but paid nonetheless, and the solitude suited his temperament. He'd been running from something for 3 years now, though he couldn't quite remember what anymore. The emergency beacon on his wrist chimed softly. Another derelict section detected. Jackson sighed and turned from the window. His magnetic boots clicked against the metal floor as he made his way toward the docking bay. The station groaned around him like a living thing, metal shifting against metal, and somewhere in its depths, the generators hummed their mournful song. He wasn't expecting to find anyone else aboard. The woman stood in Corridor 7, cradling a sphere of crystalline material that pulsed with bioluminescent light. She wore dark robes woven from what looked like star silk, and her skin carried an iridescent quality that marked her as definitely not human. Her eyes were large and amber, catching the nebula's violet glow through the observation ports. When she saw Jackson, she didn't run. "You're human," she said, and her voice carried harmonics beneath the words, something musical and strange. "You're not," Jackson replied, his hand instinctively moving toward the plasma cutter at his hip. Old instincts from his military days, though he'd been a soldier in another lifetime. "My name is Niera," the woman said, lowering the crystal carefully. "My vessel experienced catastrophic engine failure. I crashed here 4 hours ago. Your station's automated systems guided my escape pod to this location." Jackson studied her. She carried herself with the kind of poise that suggested nobility or significant wealth. Her robes were fine, though water-stained and torn. The crystal she held seemed to be scanning her body, reading something, responding to her presence. "What's that?" He gestured toward it. "My child," Niera said simply. "A catalyst sphere in its incubation phase. Without active life support, I have perhaps 18 standard hours before the developmental process fails irreversibly." Her voice didn't break, but something shifted behind her eyes. Fear. Profound, barely contained fear. Jackson felt something move in his chest, something he'd kept carefully locked away since he joined the Salvage Corps. He hated that feeling. Compassion was a luxury for people with homes, with people waiting for them. He had neither. "The station has auxiliary power," he heard himself say. "We can reach the engineering section. If the systems are still functional, I can reroute power to Medical Bay 3. It should have the necessary equipment for biological life support." Niera's amber eyes widened, reflecting the nebula's endless swirl. "You would help me? A stranger? Most humans in your position would demand payment, or worse." "Most humans probably aren't idiots," Jackson said, but he was already moving toward the engineering section. Behind him, he could hear her footsteps following, and he told himself firmly that it didn't matter. It was just practical. Just survival. Just one more job. He was very good at lying to himself. The desert of Karath stretched endlessly in every direction, its crimson sands glittering with mineral deposits that caught the dual sunlight of the binary system. Jackson shielded his eyes against the harsh glare as Niera navigated their small transport vehicle across the dunes. They'd been traveling for 6 hours since the crash landing, and his water supplies were already running lower than he liked. "My contact is in the city of Koresh," Niera said. her hands steady on the controls despite the rough terrain. He has resources that can help repair our vessel. He owes me a significant debt. Jackson had learned not to ask about Niera's past. In the 3 weeks since the station encounter, they'd grown closer, though not in ways he could easily articulate. There had been moments where her hand had brushed against his while reaching for the same object, and neither had pulled away. There had been glances held just a fraction too long, conversations that stretched into the endless nights of the void. But there had also been silences, walls she'd erected carefully, and questions she refused to answer. "We have a problem," Jackson said, pointing toward the shimmering horizon. A rider approached on some kind of scaled creature, its movements swift and purposeful. Behind it came others, perhaps a dozen more. Niera's expression shifted to something like dread. Kareth Desert Tribes, they control this region. A man emerged from the dust as they slowed their vehicle. He was humanoid, but distinctly alien. His skin a deep bronze, his hair white as sand. His eyes held the kind of knowledge that came from spending too many years in places most people avoided. "Niera," he said, approaching the transport. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever return." "Tavin," Niera replied, and Jackson caught the tension in her voice. "I need passage to Koresh. And supplies." Tavin's gaze shifted to Jackson, and something cold moved behind his expression. "Who is this?" "A traveler. Someone whose assistance proved invaluable." Niera's tone suggested she was choosing her words carefully. Tavin smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "The widow Niera, traveling with a human male. The gossip alone will fetch premium prices at the cantinas." He gestured, and the riders began circling the transport. "You're in our territory now. Our laws apply here. Payment is required for passage." Jackson's hand moved toward his weapon, but Niera's hand was suddenly on his wrist. "We will pay," she said quietly. "Name your price." That night, they sat around a fire beneath 2 moons that cast dueling shadows across the sand. The tribe had taken their supplies, their weapons, and most of their credits. Jackson wanted to be angry, but watching Niera's hands shake as she held a cup of bitter stimulant tea, he found his anger redirecting toward something else entirely. Toward whoever had put that fear in her eyes. "He was my bonded," Niera finally said, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "My husband, many years ago. We separated when our paths diverged. Our goals no longer aligned. I thought him dead until we encountered him today." Jackson set down his tea. "Did he hurt you?" Niera looked at him, and the vulnerability in her expression was like a physical thing. "Not in the way you mean, but yes, in other ways." She paused, gathering courage. "I was pregnant, Jackson. We had complications. The child died in my arms. Tavin blamed me, said I was too weak, too human sympathetic in my biology. He took my career, my position, my name, everything except the one crystal sphere, the last genetic imprint of our unborn child. It's all I have left." Jackson moved closer to her, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of her luminous hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and she leaned into the touch like a desert creature seeking water. "Your child will live," he said quietly. "We'll make sure of it." Niera turned to face him fully, and there was barely any space between them now. "You believe that? You believe we can succeed?" where everything else has failed. Instead of answering with words, Jackson closed the distance between them. The kiss was tender and desperate at once, tasting of dust and desire, and the kind of hope that shouldn't exist in a galaxy this broken. Niera's hands came up to his shoulders, pulling him closer, and for a moment, the desert and the moons and the dangerous man watching them from the shadows all faded away. When they finally broke apart, breathing heavily, Niera pressed her forehead against his. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "So am I," Jackson replied, "but we'll face it together." He didn't yet know that Tavin had plans of his own, or that this moment of fragile intimacy was being observed and catalogued for purposes neither of them could have imagined. The moon of Castellix orbited Carrot's smaller sun, its surface scarred with the remnants of ancient battles. Vorkesh emerged from the shadows of the fortress entrance, his massive frame silhouetted against the pale light. His left arm ended in a mechanical appendage that clicked and whirred with each movement. One eye was covered with a symbiotic patch that glowed faintly green. "Jackson," he said, and his voice rumbled like an earthquake. "It's been a long time." Jackson froze, the crystalline key halfway into the fortress lock. "Vorkesh, you're supposed to be dead. The colony said you died in the conflict on Castellix 7. "The colony lied," Vorkesh replied, stepping forward. "And I did die, in a way. What you see now is merely what was left behind." He turned his gaze to Niera. "And you must be the widow. Tavin has been most informative about your presence." Niera moved closer to Jackson instinctively. "You know Tavin." "I know of him," Vorkesh corrected. "We share certain professional acquaintances, but I'm not here to cause you harm. Quite the opposite, in fact." He gestured into the fortress. "The records you're seeking are inside. Everything about the genetic project, about the catalyst spheres, about what Tavin really wants." They followed him through corridors that seemed to shift and change with each turn, their footsteps echoing off walls covered in ancient pictographs. Finally, they reached a chamber where holographic displays still functioned, powered by some long-forgotten energy source. "The project started 200 years ago," Vorkesh explained, activating a series of projections. Aliens and humans both were fascinated by hybrid biology, by what could be created when species merged their genetic codes. The catalyst spheres were designed as incubators, but also as something more. Weapons, potentially. Life forms capable of adapting to any environment, any enemy. Jackson watched the holograms, understanding dawning. Niera's child. "It was part of the project," Vorkesh confirmed. "Your wife, Niera, was selected specifically because of her bloodline's compatibility with human genetics. The sphere isn't just incubating a child. It's creating a bridge between our species." Niera reached out and grasped Jackson's hand. "I didn't know. Tavin never told me the full scope of what we were being asked to do. When I learned fragments of the truth, when I realized what they intended to do with our child, we fought. That's when the complications began." Vorkesh moved to one of the displays and called up a new projection. A young girl's face appeared, her features a beautiful blend of human and alien characteristics. "This is the sphere's final form. This is what your child will become, if she survives to term." "She?" Niera's voice broke. "We were having a daughter?" Jackson pulled her close, and she turned to bury her face against his chest. He could feel her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He held her, feeling the immensity of what they'd discovered, what had been taken from her. "Why are you helping us?" Jackson asked Vorkesh. "Because I was like Tavin once," the warrior replied. "I believed in the project. I believed in what we could create. And then I saw what happened when the first generation was weaponized. I saw what we'd built being used as tools of destruction." He turned away from the displays. "I made a choice then. I got out. I've been hiding here for 50 years, studying the archives, trying to understand how to stop it. Tavin still serves the old masters. They want the spheres, all of them. And they want to restart the breeding program with stronger candidates." Jackson felt anger rise in his chest, hot and pure. "Then we destroy the sphere. We remove the temptation." "No," Niera said, quietly, pulling back to look at him. "We don't. We complete the incubation. We let our daughter live. And we show them that their weapons can choose compassion instead of destruction." Jackson looked down at her, this remarkable woman he'd come to love with an intensity that terrified him. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, deeply and thoroughly, in the ancient chamber beneath the crystalline fortress. Around them, the holographs flickered and danced like ghostly dancers, celebrating a love that shouldn't exist but did. "Together," he murmured against her lips. "Always," she replied. Vorkesh watched them with something that might have been approval, or might have been the simple recognition of kindred spirits choosing hope over despair. The Obsidian Nebula lived up to its reputation, a vast darkness punctuated by stars that seemed impossibly distant. Jackson navigated their vessel through the swirling currents of stellar dust, his hands steady on the controls despite the tension that thrummed through his entire body. Niera sat beside him, her hand resting on her abdomen, where the catalyst sphere nestled safely in its containment field. They'd been safe for 4 weeks. 4 weeks of growing love, of planning a future, of believing they might actually escape Tavin's reach and the shadowy organization that served him. 4 weeks of precious stolen time. The communication system crackled to life with Vorkesh's voice. The warrior had stayed behind to provide covering fire while they escaped, buying them passage through the asteroid field. "Jackson, I have incoming contacts. 3 vessels approaching from bearing Mark 7. Their configuration matches the pattern associated with." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Niera's face went pale. That was Tavin's signature frequency. "He's found us." Jackson pushed the vessel faster, feeling the strain in the engines. "The coordinates Vorkesh gave us. We should reach the rebel base within the hour. There's a resistance movement hiding in this region. People who've already lost family to the breeding program. They'll protect us." "They'll never let us go," Niera said, her voice hollow. "Tavin has invested too much. Our daughter represents leverage for him, proof of concept for his masters. They'll never stop hunting us." As if in response to her words, the space around them erupted in weapons fire. The pursuing vessels were enormous, dreadnoughts designed for long-range planetary assault. They didn't try to disable the transport. They simply fired with the intent to annihilate. Jackson threw the controls into a hard dive, and the transport screamed in protest. Alarms blared throughout the cabin. Niera's hand flew to her crystalline sphere, cradling it protectively. She was murmuring to it in her native language, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "I'm going to try something," Jackson said. He plotted a course directly into a meteor field, knowing the larger vessels couldn't follow. The transport shook violently as asteroids grazed the hull, but the pursuing ships, massive and slow, fell back. They emerged in a clear pocket of space, and ahead, shielded by stellar radiation and magnetic anomalies, lay what appeared to be a derelict station. Vorkesh's coordinates. The rebel base. A docking bay opened, and they descended toward it. As the landing mechanisms engaged and sealed them into the station, Jackson allowed himself to breathe. Then, the airlock cycled open, and Tavin stepped through, flanked by armed soldiers. "Niera," he said, his voice carrying that false warmth that had always made Jackson's skin crawl. "You've caused me considerable expense and inconvenience. However, I'm prepared to be merciful. Surrender the sphere and the human, and you'll be allowed to live out your remaining years in comfort. Retirement is well-deserved for a widow of your age." "No," Niera said, her voice clear and steady. She stood and faced him directly, the crystalline sphere cradled in her hands. "I'm not surrendering anything. My daughter will not become a weapon. She will not be used for your twisted experiments." Tavin's expression hardened. "The sphere is the property of the organization. You serve that organization, by contract and by bloodline. The sphere belongs to them. Your choice is irrelevant." Jackson stepped forward, placing himself between Niera and Tavin. "She said no. That makes it relevant. That makes it everything." Tavin smiled, cold and cruel. "How touching. The human male displays protective instincts. How evolved." He gestured, and his soldiers raised their weapons. The doors to the docking bay exploded inward. Vorkesh emerged, his mechanical arm fully powered, followed by a contingent of fighters bearing the insignia of the resistance. Behind them came more, dozens of people who'd already lost children to the breeding program. Scientists who'd worked against the project from within. Soldiers who'd defected from the organization's ranks. "We've been expecting you, Tavin," said a woman at the front of the resistance group. Her name was Merrick, and her eyes held the kind of anger that only came from profound loss. "We've been monitoring your movements for 3 years. Everyone you've recruited here is one of ours." Tavin's face shifted through several emotions before settling on something like respect. A well-executed trap. I underestimated the rebellion. A mistake I won't repeat. He raised his weapon, but Vorkesh was faster. The warrior's mechanical arm struck like lightning, disarming Tavin and sending him sprawling. Soldiers rushed forward, restraining him. As they secured Tavin and his original soldiers, Merrick approached Jackson and Niera. "The sphere," she said gently. "May we examine it? We have doctors who specialize in catalyst species. We can help ensure a healthy development." Niera hesitated, then looked at Jackson. He squeezed her hand, offering silent support. Together, they extended the sphere toward Merrick. That night, in a private chamber deep within the station, Jackson and Niera made love with the kind of intensity born from having faced death and survived. They were careful, tender, knowing that the sphere was close enough to sense their emotional resonance. According to what they'd learned, healthy emotions during development promoted optimal psychological development in the catalyst species. Jackson whispered to her of futures and promises. Niera held him close and allowed herself to believe that such futures might actually be possible. 6 months later, the sphere underwent its final transformation. The crystalline matrix dissolved away, replaced by skin that shimmered with subtle iridescence. The child emerged, small and perfect, with her mother's amber eyes and her father's determination. They named her Solaris. The rebellion provided them safe passage through the galaxy, forging new identification documents and creating a false history. Jackson found work as a navigator for refugee transport vessels, helping people escape from oppression and danger. Niera took a position as a scientist within the Resistance, studying catalyst biology to better understand and protect others like their daughter. Tavin faced trial before the Resistance's council and received a sentence of lifetime labor in the mining colonies of the Outer Rim. Vorkesh became a teacher, training young fighters in combat techniques and the philosophy of redemption through action, rather than punishment. 5 years after Solaris's birth, Jackson stood on the observation deck of a new vessel, specially constructed by the Resistance to carry families toward the distant colonies being established beyond the reaches of the organization's influence. His daughter played nearby, her laughter like chiming crystals. She'd inherited the best of both parents, her mother's wisdom and her father's courage. Niera joined him at the viewport, her arm slipping around his waist. The galaxy spread before them, infinite and full of possibility. "Do you think she'll be safe?" Niera asked, watching their daughter play with the other hybrid children born from the rebellion's breeding protection program. "I think she'll be incredible," Jackson replied. "I think all of them will be. Because they won't grow up as weapons. They'll grow up as our children, raised with love and hope instead of violence and fear." He turned to face Niera fully, still amazed after all these years that she'd chosen him, that they'd somehow created something beautiful from the most broken circumstances imaginable. He kissed her, and she responded with the same passion and tenderness they'd shared since that first moment in the Violet Nebula. "I was thinking," Niera said, breaking the kiss, but keeping her forehead pressed against his, "about having another child, a biological sibling for Solaris. The rebellion's medical technology is sophisticated enough now to minimize risks." Jackson felt his heart expand. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Niera replied, "except for one thing." "What's that?" "That finding you was the greatest stroke of luck that ever befell me. That night on the station, when you could have ignored me, could have left me to face that crisis alone. That moment changed everything." Jackson pulled her close, their daughter now running toward them, her voice calling out in her own unique hybrid language that carried harmonics from both her parents' species. As Solaris reached them, Jackson scooped her into his arms, and Niera wrapped them both in her embrace. Together, the three of them stood at the observation window and watched the stars wheel past, infinite and eternal, a canvas for all the adventures still to come and the love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The organization still existed somewhere in the distant reaches of Empire space, still harboring ambitions about genetic programs and hybrid warriors. But here, in this small family, and in the thousands like them, scattered across the rebellion's network, they'd already proven that love was stronger than any design, any plan, any weapon. As the vessel jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind the Obsidian Nebula and the treacherous past it represented, Jackson whispered a promise to the starlight. Their daughter, and all the children like her, would build a future where compassion wasn't a weakness to be bred out, but the very foundation of civilization itself. And somewhere in the vastness of the galaxy, in colonies named after hope and peace and freedom, new worlds bloomed with possibilities that had never existed before.